There are always going to be times when you're going to want to use PowerPoint with presentations. Maybe not all the time, but when you do, if you are a professional speaker, you probably want it to look as good as it can possibly look. In fact, if it doesn't look like a high quality presentation visually, it could be damaging your brand and your professional credibility. So that's certainly something we wouldn't want. It's essential then to make sure that your visual storytelling is as good as it possibly can be, which is why I'm very happy to introduce you to my guest. And in fact, I'm going to let my guest introduce herself to you.
I'm Emily Schneider. I am a visual storyteller specializing in PowerPoint design. My magical knack is simplifying complex information. I help business leaders, presenters, speakers, anybody who has a story to tell it with more impact, concisely, saving them time and energy and elevating their confidence.
Welcome to Present Influence, the show that helps coaches, speakers, and communication professionals develop the skills to impact, influence, and inspire. My name's John Paul, keynote coach, professional speaker, and your guide on this journey to mastery level communication and presentation skills. My mission is to provide professional communicators like you with everything you need to maximize your impact and present with influence. Follow the show on your favorite podcast app for weekly episodes and join me on LinkedIn for the weekly Present Influence newsletter. Also, if you haven't already done so and you enjoy the show, please do leave us a 5-star review on the app that you are listening on. It does help other people to know that this could be a good show for them too. And I will really appreciate it. Emily, I'm so happy to have you on the show today because I don't think I've ever had someone with your kind of expertise. And I know that my audience are going to really value this because we may not use PowerPoint in every single presentation, but there's no doubt we use it, and we use it a lot as speakers, as coaches, as presenters, whether it's going to be in a keynote or in a workshop or on a Zoom or whatever it is you're doing. Having good PowerPoint, we see a lot that isn't. I can understand why we need somebody like you. Tell us a little bit about what the need is you've seen in the industry and how you help people.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm so excited to talk about it because it's always fun that I geek out about a topic that a lot of people have pretty harsh feelings about. But yes, like you said, PowerPoint or just presentations in general and the visuals that go to them are so critical and used so much. The challenges or the need that I find the most is a couple. One, people either don't know how to use the tool, but they're expected to. So they get this overwhelming feeling of over communicating because they don't know how to tell a story properly, especially when it comes to the visuals, right? We're really good at connecting and talking in real life, but when you add visuals to it, it lays this whole other level of complexity and just, I think, anxiety, if that's fair to say. And then the other way that I really love helping people is, especially when you're talking about speakers and presenters and business leaders, is they know where their boundaries are and they'll raise their hand and they'll be like, I don't have time, nor is this the right place for me to be putting my energy, but I know what it needs to do or it needs to say. And so I love partnering and collaborating in that way. I'm such as somebody who loves being part of the process. Like I will take it off your hands, but then I will keep you engaged so it still is yours and you'll own this at the end. And it should always feel like it comes from you as the presenter and the sharer of that information. But I really just like, it's the best when I can save people time and energy, especially C-suites and business leaders and those keynote speakers. Like you focus on what you need to focus on. This is my zone of genius. I'll do my magic. And then together, when we come together, there's this magical collaboration. And then everybody's so happy and excited. And I'm sure you can speak from your experience, but I find that when you're more confident and you're more prepared to make that presentation or to share that update, it makes such a difference in how that information is received, accepted, and how your audience really engages with you. And you feel like such a winner at the end. And that's the most important part in my mind is helping somebody else feel confident and ready to do their job. It's so fun.
I really understand that because we are, I think, in an environment now, professionally at least, where if you don't have things that look professional, that are of a high quality, and you're out there doing that, people really judge that very harshly because we have so much access to all the stuff that's done really well that we really notice it when it's not done well and when it's done badly. So I think what you're doing is super important. That's why I'm so glad that you agreed to come and speak with me today. Here's a question for you though. What are the kinds of presentations and talks that you most think benefit from having PowerPoint and solid visual representations?
I'm going to say I'm just somebody that thinks everything should have a visual because I speak in visual language. I just can understand concepts when somebody's sharing something with me, when they're talking about something. It can be as simple as I always use the example. They're describing what the trees look like outside of their house. There's millions types of trees. So I need a visual. I need some kind of story or picture painted so that I can really understand and connect and see what they see or feel what they feel. That's the whole point of stories is it connects us, right? It makes us feel that emotional connection. And when we're emotionally connected, we're so much more engaged and we're excited. And especially in a business sense, I think sometimes people are like, I don't want to be like emotional or have all these feelings, but I think it's important. Those one-on-one conversations, which is what I believe presentations really are really about creating that emotional connection with somebody and not just surface level. And I think as business is evolving, we're finding that more and more that people want that connection. But going back to going back to your question of, I think every kind of story or presentation should have a visual. And we're also used to that. Like we're so used to being stimulated and getting information in so many ways. And at the same time, there's been so much learning and just, I think now things are more accepted that like we all learn different. I have young kids. And so I'm really learning that like the way they retain information at school, it doesn't look the same way I did. They need it sent, shared or repeated, or they need the visual, or they need to have that hand to mind connection. And that's where I think the power of visual storytelling is so important because you allow your audience to digest the information in the way that's right for them, but you get to lead it in the way that you want it to. When you have a well-crafted story, a visual story, your audience can listen to you. They can see it on the slide. They can feel it, right? They get all these different inputs and it really benefits both you as the sharer and as the audience receiving this information. I mean, I geek out about the neuroscience of it, right? But like we're 65% more likely to retain information when it's visually designed. It just clicks better. Same as bullets, right? How many times have you read something or seen something on a slide and it's so overwhelming because there's so many words that you don't even know what to remember. But if I design or bold even the one or the three words that are really critical, I'm going to remember those. Now delete the rest of those words that aren't important. And I'm really focused on what the presenter is saying because I can follow along in a way that is digestible. It becomes relatable. I build trust with my presenter because I'm engaged with them. And it's such a win-win for both you as the presenter. But I think when we think about it, it's really about making sure you're connecting with your audience on the right way, right? It's not about what's in it for me. It's about what's in it for them. And going back to why I love what I do, when you show up more confident, you're going to connect with them. It's going to be about them because you're not worried. You're not having this conversation in your head as you're presenting. Do people care? You know that it's good and you're ready to share that out.
Also, when I've coached people who are doing their talks and we talk about things like PowerPoint and visual aids, I guess we'll call it. But the advice I always give is it should only ever enhance your presentation. And I'm certainly open to the possibility that every presentation could be enhanced by this as well. I can certainly get some truth to what you're saying here then. Where do you think most people initially go wrong with this?
Can I actually respond to something that you said about like enhancing the presentation? So I like to use this analogy that I help my clients become the conversation conductors. And I see that you have a classical piano book behind you. So I think you might be familiar with this kind of theory, but the idea is like when you go and see an orchestra, there's the conductor and he stands on stage and he helps create that harmonious experience. He knows he's cueing the instruments and the players and the sections, and he's helping to create the sound that comes to life. And as an audience member, you get to sit back and you get to experience it and you get to feel it. And when you become a conversation conductor, when you lead that presentation or you're having this conversation, your slides should be the background harmonious music to this experience. So they're not taking over what is happening. They're actually helping to set this kind of, just this overall experience that really, again, helps to elevate and connect your audience with what you're saying and so that they build that trust. And I love when my clients come back and say it works, right? I led this conversation. I guided them to feel the rhythm, to hear the things, to focus on what I wanted to at the right time. That's the win. So going to your question about like, what do I see that goes wrong is when we over communicate, when we don't create this harmonious experience for somebody. I love to use the term death by PowerPoint, right? How many times have you sat in a presentation where it's so overdone? It's not even designed. There's just so much information because sometimes we think that over communicating shows our credibility. where really the confidence and that cool confidence comes when you know what you know and you're sharing the right important information with your audience. One of my first questions with my clients is, who are you talking to and what do you want them to think, feel, and do throughout this presentation, and especially at the end? And when you start with that in mind, with them in mind, you can create and craft your story both visually and with your narrative to really hit home on what you should do, because over communication is going to drown people out, and they're used to getting a lot of information and then tuning out what they don't want. And that is the opposite of what you want in a presentation when you're sharing something.
I'll be honest, this is one of the biggest challenges for keynote speakers in general, is keeping things more minimal in terms of information, like having the essential information. And the mistake that people make is thinking that adding more content, more information is adding more value. And it's generally not. It's mostly overloading people to a point where they're not going to remember most or any of what you said if you do that. There are situations, though, where we do have to deliver somewhat data-heavy presentations, workshops, etc. Are there ways that we can make data more visually digestible for our audiences?
100%. There's so many great tricks and tips I have. One of them is simply, and as you talk about like overwhelmingness, is breaking that information up. I'm a big component of less on a slide, more slides. Not only do our brains connect that there's something new I need to maybe listen to as this presenter is changing slides, but it gives you the ability to focus on that one or two key things that are really critical. And sometimes when it comes to data, it's not necessarily having a new chart, but it's highlighting the different parts of what your narrative is saying that aligns with the visuals. Again, it's reinforcing, it's that harmonious background visual that supports what you're talking about. It's also, to your point, of not overdoing it. A lot of times I'll get data, and to be honest, I got into this business because I geek out about data infographics. It's part of my like journey to get to where I'm at, but they give you all the information. I'm like, is it really important when you're giving this update, or if this is what you're focused on and this is the quarter that you want to talk about, why do you need to talk about what happened last year? Or if you do, let's just breeze over it and then let's pull out this, whether it's in color, whether it's just zooming in on that section of the graph. Some of the other things are like limiting the amount of information. So do I have to label every X and Y axis, every dot or every bar column? Does it need to have the numbers associated? Or is that overall feeling going to get where I see the bars going up and then I see where the dip is? That shows me what the data is proving, or what the narrative then is really the voiceover to connect the dots. And the best part is our brains do this great work for us. They want to put the puzzle pieces together. So if you set it up properly, it really does work. So simplifying your labels and your accesses, leveraging colors to highlight and focus things. Now, I don't want to see a rainbow of colors to show a year. I always use the kind of the quick terms of whether you're talking about quarters or talking about a certain product and you're looking at data overall, start to associate colors throughout your whole presentation and definitely use those in your data visualizations, because again, our brains will start to see the connections, and you can reinforce it. You could still have labels or your keys and your legends that highlight that. But I think that's really important. Sometimes people will put like a data chart, and sometimes do I actually need the whole graph, or do I just need to like design more of an infographic treatment of the numbers and the success and where we were to where we're going? I've done a lot where I'll show pie charts, but instead of just having the pie chart, you're calling out the numbers in the middle, or you're toning those back and you're overlaying it with the information on top, because that's what's most important. I have the visual support, but if I just had the pie chart, it's not as impactful. It doesn't mean as much. Creating a little bit of drama in there, but simple and consistently, really helps to elevate that experience. And again, connect and help your audience focus on what you want them to be focused on.
That's cool. But sometimes when you're working with clients, do you ever present some things like that in some different ways so they can see like what maybe is most effective, or do you have a pretty good idea?
No, always. I'm always one. I actually think maybe it's not a default, but I always tell my clients, like when we work together, like I'm going to give you a couple options and you can pick, because again, the beauty of it is, and visual interpretation is not necessarily subjective, but the way I think about something and what resonates with me might not be right for what works for you as a presenter. And I'm not like, I'm just not jumping in, but right now I'm coming in as an outside source, trying to give a different perspective. And so, yes, There's always multiple ways. But one of the beautiful parts of that is usually within a sequence of whether it's 10 to 20 slides in a presentation. Once we figure out one or two examples, you get that rhythm, right? I like to say I like to speak their language, but it takes me a second to learn. But there's multiple ways to always solve a creative problem. I also always tell people, like, I have a phone, right? You have a phone. There's a picture button. There's a text message button. There's a phone button. How we access those and where we get them, even though they're the same thing on our phones, is so different because our user experience and how our habits or how we leverage that is different. And that's the same when it comes to design. So there's some best practices. Sometimes people want to be totally out of the box, and sometimes people are like, keep me really simple because it's really critical. One of the examples is I recently was working with a venture capitalist company, and they had a timeline, and just articulating, I think we went through 4 different versions of a timeline sequence of visualizing it. I thought I had some really great ones at the beginning, but it was too much for her. It was focused too much on the wrong part of that story. And that's what I love actually about my process is I work directly with clients. I share my screen. Everything is on because you have to see the evolution and you have to see how things move, because when you move something, it makes you feel or think, or different parts come to the focus, and aligning and working through those creatively is such a huge win because in the end, it's always better.
Yeah. I know that a lot of people who listen to this show will be the kinds of people who have their own logos and branding. And you'd mentioned some things about bringing color and things like that. What recommendations would you have for bringing in personal branding without it becoming intrusive or cheesy or anything like that,
Yeah.
so that you can still brand your own presentations?
I think branding is so important because, again, it creates that credibility. Your audience then knows that you're real, right? That you care about this, that it's important, that it's not something showing up half baked is like, it's very obvious. But personal branding is critical, but it comes down to, and usually I think if you have your personal brand, you've already gone through the exercise of you have 1 or 2 brand fonts, use those. Your color palette, use that. And if you only have 3 colors, that's great. There's opacities you can use. You can play with it. Even if it's only 1 color throughout the thing, there's a lot of great ways you can use color blocking. You can bring in grays or toning things back to help really create an essence of a brand. But simply, like, even just the credibility of using your colors consistently, your own brand colors, and your fonts. So if you have a headline and it's always in the same spot, it should always be the same font, because my brain starts to think that I know I'm going to see it there. Logos. Some clients like logos, their logo on every page. Some clients don't need it because they feel like it's part of a system. But again, keep it in the same spot. When you start creating this chaos and I need to find what you're talking about, or things are jumping around, especially I think when you're thinking about it as a keynote and you're on this big screen, if your logo starts moving, even if it shifts to the right, you lose your credibility, but it also creates confusion for your audience. So I'm a big component of locking things into the same space and using them intentionally. I think going back to, we see some beautiful stuff in AI or Canva. There's all these great access to tools, but PowerPoint does a great job of really helping us create the guidelines and the grids and making sure things are locked in so that you create that consistency, where I know just Canva doesn't have the tools yet to create that jump. But
So
one of
you
my
can
pet
have
peeves.
like template slides that kind of
Exactly.
model off each of those. Do you feel that there should be some link to your branding on all of your presentation, or are there some exceptions where that's not so important?
I think it always will be, because if you use your brand font and you use your brand colors, a data chart's going to feel like it's yours than if you default to the PowerPoint colors. Even when you bring in photography, there's a sense and there's an emotional feel, or illustrations and icons. Using your colors simply helps create that brand connection. Photography, again, if you can build it as you do it, that's actually one of my favorite things to do with clients. Is they'll be like, I don't have much of a brand. And I'm like, let's not create a fake template. Let's actually create a presentation and then build back of what your guidelines are in your presentation template. But using the same style of imagery, colorizing it the same way, or cropping it and treating it so it feels holistic. Simply having a full image on a slide, if you have a couple images and they all feel like they're from the same photo shoot, let's say, you've created a brand. You've created a benchmark of what to expect of how I'm going to share information with you or things with you. And when it comes to photography, one of my other favorite tips, I think, is Because again, going back to keynotes, I know sometimes you just need a picture because you want to show that emotional connection. If you're in a small business meeting, I'm going to show you more of the specific data interaction, but I might show you a picture of this experience that the consumer has, whatever that may be. Turning an image black and white is like such a simple trick to help you brings it back to your brand. I don't know, but like sometimes I see people that use 80s pictures have the yellowish hue. But if you turn it black and white, you lose all that. And it helps it feel again that it aligns and it fits right into with your brand style. Very simply. So
That's pretty cool. What are some of the creative ways that we can perhaps use PowerPoint in our presentations that you've come across that perhaps people generally wouldn't necessarily think about that straight off the bat?
Okay, that's a good question. I don't know if I've had that where I have to so the photography and like colorizing your stuff in the same way, using color itself, again, creating your brand and leveraging that throughout your data and your charts or your headlines. Again, simplicity and consistency. So if my headlines are always going to be in a maroon, always make them in a maroon, use that as accent colors. I like to use modular or blocking of information. So you can house information in colored squares or sections, right? Dividing a slide into a third, like a 2/3 and 1/3. So you can break up information. So even though you might talk about two main topics, you're giving it space so people can digest it. I also think it's important to go from full color slide backgrounds to white, giving your brain that time to change and see that there's something different. Dividers are really important. And I think using imagery and dividers is so helpful because again, you're starting to create an experience for somebody without overlaying too much information in one slide. Those are really good. Oh, stylizing of your bullets and your fonts. So just picking things again. And PowerPoint does a great job of defaulting to this. So that always helps. But you don't want to use some bullets and sizing and colorizing of them. And then on the next slide, they're completely different. It's going to feel like a whole different presentation. And so creating, again, simplicity, consistency, and then being intentional. Those are always the top 3 kind of principles that I preach and use in my work and in my life. I think it's really important.
I hope we're a long way away now from the times when people would use like yellow as a written font and things like that on PowerPoint, stuff that's just really hard to read on a screen. But this may be polarizing for some people. Gently polarizing, I would hope. Where would you stand on things like animations and things on PowerPoints? Are they good
I think they are good, but that's like a 2.0, right? If you're just getting comfortable in elevating your visual story, you don't necessarily have to have animations. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about before, where like we're so used to seeing all these really dynamic, over-designed stuff, especially with, again, the advancement of tools and programs that are helping connect that and make that easier. But if it's not done to support what you're saying, it causes confusion. So I go into starting with just transitioning from one slide to the other and how that feels. The morph tool is a really great transition that seems very dynamic. And again, I think it's something I would Google because it's easier to like understand how to use it than for me to walk you through it. But doing a morph transition is really dynamic. It's simple and it helps elevate that experience. You don't want to overdo your animations. So you want your animations or your transitions, picking 1 or 2 approaches and using them throughout. And again, animation should help build your story. So if you're talking about 3 points, your first one maybe appears when the slide comes on, and then you click it so you control when the next one pops up. Because again, you're leading your audience to focus on the information that you want them to focus on. But again, it's not about doing a million different styles. It's about picking 1 or 2 approaches and then using those throughout.
I still have burned into my brain some bad experiences from when Apple Keynote first came out and people getting a little bit carried away with some of the features and animations on these things and using them very excessively in presentations, which was funny at the time, but also cringy as well.
Scary. Yeah. And one of my other starter tips I should share is, so let's say you want to do animations or you want to do a building sequence, but you're not comfortable in animation. You can just have 3 slides, right? You build the first slide and then the second slide has the added second section that you're talking about. And then the third slide. So it looks like it builds, but from your abilities in the PowerPoint. You don't have to be nervous if animations are going to build right or how it looks, because there are some technicalities in understanding how that works. And everybody's comfortable in their own way, but always explore it. I'm always one to try something new. It's always great.
Are there any kind of other advanced things? Like, I know you help people specifically with this. So are there any of the more advanced tools that probably people wouldn't really use on their own that you might get as your experience with working with someone who does this profession?
That's interesting. Maybe it's PowerPoint has their own library of imagery, illustrations, photography, vector shapes that I think people don't always know. Again, it's in the insert tab. You can find them and you can search. There's also an amazing company. It's called Bright Carbon. I think they're in the UK, and they have an add-on that really helps to think about, and maybe it's a little bit advanced, but they actually have some great trainings too, where it's how to use the program better, or just simply controlling the lettering spacing between letters, but also the line spacing. Those kind of things are really important, and it helps you feel like you're sharing something that's a little bit more elevated, and it sets that bar. Again, it creates that brand credibility. It's always the little things. It's those simple little details that really do make such a big difference.
One of the ways that I've been tripped up, and I've certainly seen other people get tripped up on this as well in their professional presentations, is bringing in audio and video into their PowerPoints as well. What would you say? Should we avoid that, or are there some better ways to bring that in and have it still work and be effective?
That's a really good question. I don't work a lot with videos and animation and voice or audio because my clients, it just hasn't been something that has been prevalent. I think that's more in, again, like bigger sessions. And that is, you're going to be working with somebody. You want to connect with your person on site and your tech people and do some testing. The biggest kind of hiccup there is file size, right? And it's the delay, but there are controls about how and when things are started, and if it's automated or if you have to click. And that's always, again, when I'm working in animation or bringing in, sometimes there has been videos with my clients, I always ask them, like, what are you more comfortable in? Do you want this to automatically play, or do you want to be in control? And I think those are critical things to know what your comfort is. And then again, you need to be confident in how it works. And once you're confident, it doesn't matter, because you know you're going to click it, or you know it's going to roll and you don't have to think about it. So each person has their own perspective on that. But I would say it comes with the planning and the preparation and the testing for sure.
I've been aware in certain situations with clients before that there's been something of a tendency to create the PowerPoint before the presentation. Would you think that always has to be created first, or is that a way that could actually work?
I think it could work. But my best practice, and actually I was just sharing about this yesterday, is you have to start with the end in mind. You have to write your story first. You have to know what you want to say. It doesn't have to be totally baked in terms of your narrative, but you have to lay out that groundwork so that you know what points you want to share. And to be honest, I'd say get offline when you do that. Write that somewhere else. My favorite tip is grab a bunch of Post-it notes and a Sharpie, because you can't erase it. Start writing your ideas down, one idea per Post-it note, and get them somewhere where you can move them around and you can start to see the sequence of what you want to share and how you want to share it. And you can put ideas of the visuals, you could put the topic, you could put your speaking notes, whatever it needs to be, but you'll start to see this come to life. And again, something I geek out about the neuroscience, but our brains, the screens can limit us. Even though we think there's endless possibilities with them, the way our minds actually work when we're responding to something on screen is so different than when it's paper and pencil and offline. And even brainstorming is so much more freeing when you're not stuck on a computer. Because sometimes I'm a candidate too, where I'll jump onto a PowerPoint slide and all of a sudden I'm over designing this thing and I don't even know what it's supposed to say yet. So I've got to remind myself to get offline and just take some time to really plan. I think there's so many wins that happen when you start offline and then bring it into the online space.
Not least for having less distraction.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, totally.
That. Yeah, fantastic. It's very clear that when you work with someone professionally, you're going to get a much better end product than probably most of us could do by ourselves. But for those who are doing their own PowerPoints, what would be your best advice, best practices, and maybe even some useful resources for people?
Yes, great question. So I mentioned Bright Carbon. That's an awesome resource. They have a bunch of free webinars that you can sign up for, but they also just have stuff on their website. But on my own website, I have a free resources tabs where I share I have a 4-page tip sheet that helps you from the first thing where you're like, okay, I got a presentation to share. What do I do? And it starts with your audience in mind. Then it talks about crafting your narrative. Then it talks about some design tips and tricks. And then it even talks a little bit about delivery. So that's a great resource to read or to grab. I'm, again, one visual. So I always like to have that like printed somewhere where I can reference it because it's a good reminder. I also have a masterclass recording in that free resources tab that people can access so they can learn a little bit more behind the scenes of how to do this. But yeah, I think it's about being curious and then finding something that you really like and then figuring out how they did that and backing into it. I do ask Google a lot of questions or ChatGPT about like, how do I do this? Or what's the best way to do this? Because sometimes to your point, we get blocked or we get distracted and we lose that ability to bigger. And so it's always helpful to reach out. I'm also always happy to answer some one-off questions, or I share a bunch of tips and resources or how to approach different parts of that process in my social media on LinkedIn. So that's happy to connect with people there because I think there's some
Awesome.
good resources.
No, that's great. And for people who are wanting to check out those resources or maybe would like to find out more about you and speak to you about having you do some PowerPoint work for them, what's going to be the best way for them to get in contact with you?
My website is a great place to start. I am emilyschneider.com. You can see more examples of my work. So that might be inspirational too. You can learn more about my process, who I am, where I came from, and how I work with clients. Like I said, we mentioned there's a free resource tab. I'm also going to start a newsletter this year. So that would be a great thing. So you can get that directly into your mailbox. But LinkedIn, I'm super active. I love sharing and connecting on there as well. So that's good. Another space.
You'll be able to find all of those links in the show notes. We'll make sure that you can access everything that Emily has talked about here. There's a question for you. Do you feel that AI is going to get to a point soon, or maybe it already is, maybe I'm behind the times, where it's going to be doing PowerPoints for us, or are we a long way off from that?
Sure, AI is already doing PowerPoints for us, but is it doing it right? Is it telling your story? Is it hitting the points that you need? AI is powered by humans, but if you just rely on AI to do the work, you're not connecting to your audience. It's never going to be able to create that empathetic, emotional connection to build that credibility, that authenticity, and that trust that as a presenter is so critical when you're sharing something with your audience. And so I think it could be used as a great tool, again, another resource, but it shouldn't be the end all be all, because going back to people always ask, oh, there's all these great suggestions from PowerPoint on that will pop up. Great. But are they highlighting the right thing? Are they bolding the key takeaways that you want? Probably not, because all it's doing is making it look good, but looks can be deceiving if it's not done intentionally.
I love that. I don't think I've ever come across anyone so excited about PowerPoint and visual storytelling as you, Emily. And I love that. I love that you are as well. We'll finish up with this. What's your most favorite thing to see in a PowerPoint, or maybe even put in a PowerPoint? You think, that's an absolute killer. I want to see that in pretty much every good PowerPoint.
Such a good question. I love taking data and just making it stand out and look different. So the challenge of we've got all this information and how do we really share it in a way that looks cool, that makes an impact, but also most importantly, that connects with the story I want to tell. And so it's always fun to be challenged with what clients give me in terms of over communication or the slide that just has the bullet or the words that they need to have, and then bringing that to life with a visualization through data.
Look, listener, if you listen to any of this, there is no excuse for you ever having mediocre or bad PowerPoint or slides ever again in the future. So at least go and check out the resources and take some of the advice we've got from Emily today. And I don't think you're going to go too far wrong. I'm going to be checking all that out as well. And I really love everything you shared, Emily. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with me today. I know that I'm going to be getting some good audience feedback about this as well, because we're big PowerPoint users. So thank you. Much appreciated.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, John. It was an awesome conversation. And I hope I helped people. If you learned one thing, that's always a good win for me.
Undoubtedly. Thank you.